You're listening to Now I've Heard Everything, conversations with the icons of our time.
And I'll tell you, politics has become a very, very dirty business. It was bad enough when I was in it, but now it's become even worse, and I don't like it.
1964, Republican presidential nominee Barry Goldwater. Today on Now I've Heard Everything, I'm Bill Thompson. The 2024 Republican National Convention gets underway Monday. Donald Trump will be formally nominated as the party's standard-bearer, and the convention will nominate his running mate. Now, 60 years ago, convening in San Francisco, the GOP chose firebrand Arizona Senator Barry Goldwater to be its nominee to run against incumbent Democrat Lyndon Johnson.
I accept your nomination with humbleness, with pride, and you and I are going to fight for the goodness of our land. Thank you.
But many in the GOP that year had their doubts about Goldwater, who many saw as too extreme. And his own acceptance speech at the convention didn't do much to calm their concerns.
I would remind you that extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice.
After being trounced that November by LBJ, Goldwater continued to serve in the U.S. Senate for another 22 years, helping shape the conservative policies of the GOP. After his retirement, Goldwater wrote a memoir called simply Goldwater. And when I had the chance to talk with him about it in 1988, the country was already in the thick of the George H.W. Bush versus Michael Dukakis contest. And as you're about to hear, Goldwater had some very specific points to make about that particular election, as well as, and also just how strange politics had become in general. But he also expressed his optimism about America's youth. And also keep in mind, this was 1988, so the youth he's talking about was really Gen X. So here now, from 1988, Barry Goldwater.
I am young enough that about the only thing that I remember you mainly for is the 1964 run for the presidency.
Never forget that.
Is that what, when you think of your own career, when you think of your life, is that the thing that stands out in your mind as well?
No, I don't think that. If you ask me what stands out in my life, while politics has occupied about half of my life, I think of more importance to me would be my family, both my ancestral family and my children and grandchildren, and just living out in the West.
How has Washington changed since you first came to town?
It'd be hard to describe how it's changed physically, because Washington has always been, and still is, a very, very beautiful city. And there are some wonderful people living here, coming from all over the United States. Oh, it's had the usual changes that every city's undergone. Too damn much traffic, too many people. I don't know what this place is going to be 10 years from now. When I first came here, I could drive to work any time in 15, 18 minutes. And before I retired, if I was a half an hour late getting away, it might take me an hour. Just bumper-to-bumper traffic.
You know, I don't know if you've seen some of the many articles, television pieces that have been done recently on the tone of the campaign ads in this year's presidential race. One of them the other night on one of the networks showed the girl with the daisy pedal commercial.
Well, they had that on?
They had that on, which I'd never seen before.
It was a pretty good one.
Now, are you surprised by the tone of this year's commercials?
Well, I have to tell you that I've been out of the country up until, let's see, this is Thursday. I got back Monday. I've been gone for about 10 days. So I have not been able to follow. But since I've been home, I've seen not only a few of the television spots of the presidential campaign, but I've been in places where I've seen a few of the senatorial spots. And I'll tell you, politics has become a very, very dirty business. It was bad enough when I was in it, but now it's become even worse. And I think that little ad you mentioned about the girl plucking the leaves and all of a sudden, boom, up goes the whole atomic bomb, I think that started it all.
2, 3, 4, 5.
4, 3, 2, 1, 0. These are the stakes. To make a world in which all of God's children can live, or to go into the dark. We must either love each other, or we must die.
Vote for President Johnson on November 3rd.
And I don't like it. There's no need to have dirtiness in a campaign. Both of these men that are running have worked hard. They've served their state well. They've served their nation. They're patriotic, dedicated Americans. So why try to tear that down? I don't like it.
Do you miss being out on the stump?
No, I've campaigned for Mr. Bush for months and months, and I just took a little time off to go overseas and tend to some personal business. I don't miss it. No, in fact, I don't want to ever get back as a permanent thing to it. I'll do some campaigning when I go home, Wyoming and California and back to Arizona, but I don't miss it.
You know, it occurs to me, correct me if I'm wrong, in 1964, you announced for the presidency well into the year. Was it well into 1964 when you announced? It was sometime in the...
No, I announced in late 63.
Oh, no, okay. I was
late
wrong.
December.
Nowadays, it seems like you have to announce 2 years ahead of time. Is the race too long now?
Yes, it's way too long. God, the British elect a prime minister in 2 weeks. I would love to see this country have their political conventions after Labor Day. And as soon as the conventions are over, they start campaigning with election being held the first or second Tuesday in November. It would save millions, maybe billions of dollars, and the American people know pretty much what they want, who they want, and a year or two of television, radio, newspapers, and killing yourself going from town to town isn't going to change much.
It's also very expensive, isn't it?
Oh, my God. Well, when the first time I ran for the United States Senate, I spent $45,000. The last time I ran, it cost me $1.25 million. And what's going on in this presidential campaign, I wouldn't even want to guess. But you're talking about way up in the millions, 20, 30 million.
What is there in your book that will surprise the people who thought they knew you?
Oh, I don't think there's anything in there that will surprise people. What I've done really is just sit down and record from my memory, and I kept, while I was in the Senate, what I call an alpha file. And everything that happened to me that was important went in that file. So this is the first time I really pulled out of that file. And in the book, I've discussed quite a few people, Richard Nixon, Lyndon Johnson, a few people like that. I've discussed how the Senate is run, discussed Watergate, Vietnam, quite a few things.
You've seen it all, haven't you?
I've been around.
What do you miss about when you see something like the Iran-Contra scandal break and you see the committees being chosen to hold the public hearings and things like that? Do you miss being being right in the middle of things?
No, not at all. And in fact, you mentioned the Iran-Contra hearings. The only time I'm ever asked a question about that is when I'm on a radio program or a television program. I think once in public meetings have I've been asked about that. So I just assumed that it never was much of an issue with the American people.
Is there one question that you are asked everywhere you go that you wish you could answer one more time, then you'd never have to hear it again?
No, I'll tell you, I lecture every day when I'm home to the Arizona State University students, non-academically, but just sort of a bull session. And the students cover every subject you can think of. And I'm so encouraged because these young students seem to have a much better grasp of America than their fathers and mothers had. They know more about the Constitution. They know about our economic system. So their questions are pretty generally, I'd say, non-political, but more specific on items like what's going to happen to the economy, how are we going to get along with Russia, and things like that.
It's interesting that you would say that. The other day I interviewed Jacques Lowe, who was JFK's personal photographer. And he said that he got the idea for his book because he had given a speech at his daughter's high school a couple of years ago. And now these are high school students. Mm-hmm. But they came up to him afterwards and said, is it true that President Kennedy was killed in a plane crash? Is it true he was killed in a car crash? And he said, my gosh, he says, I better write a book. Does that surprise you?
Well, I've had some experiences like that. I'll never forget. A few years ago, I was down at an air base in Florida talking with the Tokyo Raiders, Jimmy Doolittle. And after I finished lunch, Jimmy went down the line. He says, when you get ready, come on down. We'll be looking at the airplanes. So I wandered down the line, and here were a bunch of television people, radio people, newspaper. And this reporter, this girl, came up to me, and she said, Senator, who is Mr. Doolittle? I thought, Jesus Christ. And then another one, well, I said, how many of you were born before 1941? Then another one said, what is the Tokyo raid? And I thought, well, time's just marching along. And I run into situations like that all the time, and what he experiences is not new to any of us. We get older, and we forget that we're getting older, and we forget that a lot of time has gone by. My God, it's been over 50 years since Doolittle led that raid. And most of we'll say the young kids 20, 25, 30 years old, they probably never heard of it. So they ask some rather funny questions. They're funny to me, but I don't blame them.
It makes me feel old when I had a babysitter ask me what was Watergate. Just no conception.
No, and I'm kind of glad if they keep up with what's going on today. That's more important than what happened last night or yesterday.
Are you encouraged when you speak to crowds of young people?
Yes.
Are you optimistic about our future?
I really am, because of the young people. And I don't confine my bull session lectures to college students. I talk to grade schools, high schools, and I've been very, very much impressed in the last 2 or 3 years with the quality of their thinking. They know more about the Constitution and our way of life than their fathers and mothers ever knew. So I'm not worried about our future. Our future's in trouble right now. We've got a terrible debt hanging over our heads, something I wish these two candidates would talk about, and quit talking about Pledge of Allegiance and dirty harbors and crap like that. But let's hear what they're going to say about, I'm going to do this to get us out of this debt, or I'm going to assure the people, because of my actions doing this, that, and the other thing, that we'll always have a strong military able to defend our country. And get into the economics, get into politics, but quit, when you open, you talk about dirty ads. They're disgusting. I don't like them. And neither of these men are dirty men. I've known George Bush since he was a freshman in Yale. He's a very, very high-class, decent man, a wonderful father and mother, a beautiful, wonderful wife. I don't think I've ever heard George say more than 2 or 3 swear words. But somebody on the staff okays these damn fool television seconds. I don't like it.
What's your impression of Dan Quayle?
Well, I have to tell you I'm prejudiced. Not because I'm a Republican, but Dan Quayle went to school with some of my children in Arizona. His mother was a good friend of mine. His grandfather was one of my best friends, and one of the most important editors this country's had, Gene Pulliam. So I start off having known him as a boy. Then when he came to the Senate, he was assigned to my committee on the Armed Forces, and I said, what am I going to do with this fellow? So I asked him one day if he were interested in acquisition. He said yes. So I formed a little subcommittee and gave it to him and as a co-chairman, a very, very fine Democrat. And I'll tell you, that subcommittee's done one hell of a good job. So I'm prejudiced. Now, I'll have to admit that when I heard that Bush had picked Quayle, I was somewhat surprised. In fact, I was sitting in the bathtub. I'd been standing up and might have fallen down. I'd never even thought for a minute that Bush was seriously considering him. Of course, I have to say this. I don't think Bush I don't know anybody that he talked to about the vice presidency. I was suggesting in roundabout ways General Powell, black man, not because he was black, but because I think he has the best brain in Washington on foreign policy. Mm-hmm. But it never came to be. So I'm prejudiced on the Quayle question. I think the press did a dirty job on him. Now the next question is, will he hurt the ticket? People don't vote for the vice president. And if you'd asked me 2 months after Harry Truman was made vice president, would he make a good president? I said, hell no. Now you ask me who the best president is this 100 years, I'll say Harry Truman. So that's a hard question to answer.
Barry Goldwater died in 1998. He was 89 years old. Now you can get your copy of Goldwater by Barry Goldwater by tapping the link in our show notes or by going to our website, heardeverything.com. We may earn an Amazon commission if you make a purchase. While you're at heardeverything.com, don't miss my 1998 interview with the 1996 GOP nominee, Bob Dole.
People say, oh, conservative, Republican, they're not funny. Like, well, I think Barry Goldwater helped to spell that, and certainly Ronald Reagan did. Goldwater was talking one time about, you Jews couldn't play at the golf course. He said, well, I'm half Jewish. Can I play 9 holes?
And my 1994 conversation with the man that Barry Goldwater was talking about, 1988's vice presidential nominee for the Republicans, Dan Quayle.
It was an unfair and untrue caricature that was developed in those first weeks of the 1988 campaign. But after that, there just was no incentive, no desire to go back in and to find out who the real Dan Quayle is.
And of course, we post new episodes of Now I've Heard Everything every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and you can find us everywhere you listen to podcasts. And thank you so much for listening. Next time on Now I've Heard Everything, as we approach the 25th anniversary of the tragic death of John F. Kennedy Jr., we'll revisit my 2002 interview with the man who was executive editor of George Magazine and who had an office right next door to JFK Jr.'s. My interview with Richard Bradley.
John, on the one hand, felt this great sense of obligation to be out there to continue the work of the Kennedy family. But he was raised by someone who, by all accounts, had profound ambivalence about John being a part of the Kennedy family.
That's next time on Now I've Heard Everything. I'm Bill Thompson.